Hi, Mom. Engine 315 really is special, and you've got a special treat that you're being pulled by her today. She started life for the Florence and Cripple Creek Railroad in 1895 as engine number 3, the Elkton. She ran on the Florence and Cripple Creek throughout their system until 1917, when Florence and Cripple Creek had a massive flood and washed out 9 miles of their trackage. They were not doing well financially, and they couldn't afford the rebuild, and 315 by then was a 20-year-old engine, and she was put on the scrap heap. Most locomotives only have a life of between 25 and 30 years on a railroad before they're either worn out or they're superseded by a better, newer engines than that. The 315 was saved from the scrap heap by the Denver Rio Grande in 1917 for the war effort for World War I. They brought her in along with 5 of her sister engines from the Florence and Cripple Creek. She was rebuilt and brought up to modern standards in 1917. And at the time, they reinforced her boiler and kept her boiler pressure at 160 pounds of boiler pressure. All the rest of the engines were downgraded to 145 pounds. So she was the queen of the fleet for her size of the engine at the time. It also was a major factor later on that saved her from the scrapping torch, because she could still pull at her original rating and the other engines couldn't. She was originally numbered 425 until 1923, when they merged with the Denver Rio Grande Western. At that time, they had duplicate engine numbers, and they renumbered all their engines, and she was renumbered to be 315, which she kept through the rest of her life on the Denver Rio Grande. She worked throughout the Western Slope and assigned over the years through Alamosa and Montrose, and she was in 1929 she was released to the Rio Grande Southern, and she ran passenger service on the Rio Grande Southern from Durango to Rico to Telluride. For a number of years, she ran back and forth every other day on the Rio Grande Southern on their passenger service. Come the middle years into 1930s, she ran all over the Western Slope. The Denver and Rio Grande were bringing on new, bigger engines, such as 484, but they were heavier. The Denver and Rio Grande were not putting money into upgrading the trestles and the bridges and the rail on their smaller lines, and they needed to keep a few engines around to work the smaller lines. 315 was scheduled to be scrapped. They said, no, we can't scrap her. We need her to run these smaller lines, so she survives through that time period. At that time, she was almost a 50-year-old engine. In 1939, she threw a rod, her main drive rod, on her right side, and it didn't damage the locomotive too much, but she was nearly a 50-year-old engine, and she was put out for scrap. Come World War II, coming on board, they said, oh, we need some more engines again. They brought her back off the scrap line, put a different main drive rod on her. Her right side rod and her left side main drive rod are different. You get a chance to look at her, look at the 2 different rods on the 2 different styles on the sides. They kept her that way through the rest of her life. 315 is special. All the photographers come out for the 315. And that's why you see so many people chasing along the line here with 315. There's Linda. Now she has power, yeah. In 1939, the War Department was procuring all the narrow gauge locomotives they can to send to the White Pass in Yukon for the war effort to build the Alaska Highway. They wanted 315. Denver and Rio Grande said, no, we can't let you have her. We're needed for critical war use ourselves. She got a waiver and didn't have to go to the White Pass in Yukon. On the White Pass in Yukon, almost all the engines that went to Alaska never came back. They were scrapped in Alaska. They just wore them out. At the end, most of them were way old. They weren't worth saving. In 1939 and 1940, 315 was hauling uranium ore out of Telluride. She has her star for the war effort as hauling the ore that built the bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima for World War II, ending World War II. Which is why the Denver and Rio Grande wouldn't let the War Department have her, because she was critical to the war effort for hauling uranium ore. Post-war, she worked throughout the system. In 1947, she was converted to run for the Denver and Rio Grande as a switch engine for the Durango Yard. In the interim, she was stationed out of Chama for a number of years. She was stationed out of Alamosa, Montrose, and she ran the entire system over the years. In 1947, the union negotiated a contract that said that all switch engines had to have auto reverse on their engines, and 315 could not be converted because she was so old. She was a nearly 60-year-old engine at that time. So she was retired in 1949 in the city of Durango after working as a switcher. She was donated and put in the park in Durango. In 1953, she was pulled out of the park and she starred in the movie Around the World in 80 Days. So she's the star locomotive. Now, you won't recognize her unless I tell you, they put her in a god-awful circus paint. Reds and greens and yellows and oranges and a fake smokestack on her and such. But it's 315. They put a different name on her and everything else. But she is the star of the movie. So when you go back home, you watch Around the World in 80 Days on Netflix, it's 315 that's running on the edge. She sat in the park for 48 years. A bunch of us local train fans got together, decided that she was looking pretty bad. We were going to give her a new paint job. One of the members uttered the famous words, "I wonder if we can get her the run." 7 years and nearly $1 million in cash and donation in kind. We got her running in 2007. She's been running ever since. We've run her on the Durango and Silverton, and we'll run her here on the Cumbres Toltec. You're fortunate because we're only going to run her 3 times this year. We don't run her often, and she's heading your train today. She'll be on display by herself sitting in Osier during lunch, so take an effort to go look her over. And when you get into Antonito at the end of the day, she'll also be on display in Antonito. I'm taking over in Osier, that's why I'm still clean. It's dirty in a locomotive shoveling coal. And my wife lets me come home, but she makes me super proud of my, never mind. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. You know, it's so awesome to have this historic. This is a very historic railroad, and one of the things that's so unique about this railroad is that we really promote history. It's not just a great ride through the snow. I mean, we would have thought that at May 25th, but what a great ride this is. Locomotives that are over 100 years old, almost 100 years old, 125 years old. And so I wanted to welcome you all on behalf of you may not know that this railroad is owned equally by the states of Colorado and New Mexico. And it's a very unique partnership. We're very happy that we work together so closely with each state. I happen to be from New Mexico, but that's okay. We love our Colorado people. And you know, the railroad line crosses the state line 11 times. So you can't even tell which is Colorado, which is New Mexico, in some cases. But in any event,
the better half is New Mexico.
Well, there you go. So, yes, ma'am. Yes. No, this car is a reproduction for your enjoyment today. So, yeah. But we try and promote history. When we bought the railroad in 1970, the 2 states bought the railroad in 1970, we were able to buy 0 passenger cars. 0. So all the passenger cars on the train today are ones that were made from narrow gauge flat cars and built up so you could ride the train. the first generation of passenger cars were actually converted boxcars. Some of you maybe have
P-boxes.
Yeah, and so, but you know, we started out in 1971 with some boxcars, and this is a nice ride compared to a boxcar. But in any event, we're just so glad to have you on board the train. Thank you for your support. Come back and see us again. So.
Thank you.